Do you think, as someone who has led the FDA would ever approve, even for emergency use, a vaccine for political consideration? Can you just clear this up for us?
I really don't. I'm also on the board of Pfizer. Pfizer's developing one of those vaccines. I think that there's integrity in the process inside FDA, and I think if the career staff, the professional scientists in that agency felt that they were pressured to make a decision that they didn't fully believe in, especially on something as important as this, I think you would see a lot of turnover in that agency, and it would become very apparent to the American people that the process was pressured. And I just don't think anybody's going to do that. And so I have a lot of confidence in the process for reviewing vaccines inside the agency. There's a lot of guidance and regulation that governs that process. It's multiple layers of review, staffed by career scientists that have been doing this for a very long time. And at the end of the day, these decisions are probably going to go before public advisory board meetings as well of the agency. So there's going to be a lot of public transparency on how this decision gets made.
That's good to hear, Dr. Gottlieb. The other question, and this comes up a lot, I hear from people, is that I don't want to take the first vaccine. I want to wait till it's fully FDA approved, until we have more data, more results. What are the potential side effects that you might worry about from a vaccine without being able to see the long-term impact and having it rushed through like this? What sort of concerns? And as FDA chief, what did you see? Were there vaccines that got to this phase and weren't able to go through because there were side effects or there were safety considerations?
There were vaccines that were put into very large clinical trials and ultimately didn't get approved because there were certain side effects that made their risk-benefit profile unfavorable. I think this is likely to be a very staged authorization or approval, and it's probably going to be an authorization, initial access under an emergency use authorization, where initially the people who will have access to this vaccine are going to be people who are at higher risk of either contracting the virus or having a bad outcome from the virus based on the clinical data. So if the clinical data shows, for example, that this vaccine is effective in older individuals, I think you could see a process where the initial people who get access to this are going to be older individuals, maybe people in nursing homes, also healthcare workers who are at higher risk of contracting the infection. And then you're going to see a lot of data collection around that initial availability. So it's almost going to be like a large registry where they're going to be collecting additional data. And so in terms of just Americans who aren't at high risk of the infection or high risk of contracting it, getting access to the vaccine, I think that's really a 2021 event. I think this is likely to be a staged process with different increments of people get access to this. The kinds of risks you worry about, there's a theoretical risk that the vaccine itself can potentiate getting the virus. That's a theoretical risk. There's really not a lot of evidence that could happen here, but it's one of those risks that you want to discharge. The other kinds of theoretical risks you worry about is that we've seen, for example, certain post-viral syndromes associated with coronavirus. So we don't fully understand autoimmune and inflammatory types of conditions. And if the epitope, if the protein that's causing the immune system to respond badly to the virus is the same protein that's in this vaccine, the spike protein, there is at least the potential that giving people the spike protein as a way to create immunity through a vaccine can also unmask those kinds of side effects. And in fact, we see that with flu, where we know flu has a low incidence of causing certain immune kinds of side effects, and we know the vaccine has some of those same side effects associated with it. And so that's another kind of theoretical risk you want to discharge. Now, you should be able to discharge that with, a couple of months of follow-up data on a large cohort of people. You shouldn't have to wait years and years to try to discharge that kind of risk. But you do want, a couple of months of follow-up on a very large data set of people. And that's why we're looking at, I think, getting into November timeframe, maybe even a little later, until we have that level of data on a sufficient number of people from these trials.
Dr. Gottlieb, are you concerned as we head into an extended holiday weekend about possible spikes? Or do you think people in general have learned their lessons from the early summer Sunbelt type second waves?
Look, I'm very concerned about the fall. I think we're taking a lot of infection into the fall when there is this setup for greater spread, not just because people are potentially going to be a little bit more complacent. I think the American public is a little exhausted from what we've been going through with this virus. But it's also the fall and the winter season when respiratory pathogens spread more efficiently. We're going back to school. We're going back to college campuses. People are starting to go back to work. You do see recreational facilities reopening. People are going to be moving indoors as the weather cools. So there's a lot of setup in the fall that create conditions for the spread of normal respiratory pathogens like the flu and certainly this coronavirus.
When do you expect to get data on monoclonal antibodies? And when can we expect that to be put into practice? Because everything you've said and what I've read is, and what I've heard from sources is that could actually really help bridge us to the vaccine by protecting the elderly, both preventatively and also in case they get sick.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're probably not going to have enough supply of these antibodies to be able to use them prophylactically as a bridge to a vaccine, but we could certainly have enough supply to help rescue people who become very sick from COVID. And I think these are one of the opportunities to really cut mortality even further heading into the fall and the winter. And we've substantially cut in-hospital mortality from COVID. This has been one of the disappointing features of the development process. These trials have enrolled much more slowly than we anticipated based on some of the public reporting. And so I think the timeline for getting these things to the market is going to get pushed out. A lot of us were hoping these would be available for the fall. It may be longer than that. And part of the problem has been that there's been so many clinical trials running and so many trials that potentially are more attractive for people to enroll in because they might be open label studies where people aren't going to be randomized to placebo. That's been harder for the manufacturers of these antibodies to enroll those clinical trials. And that's been really a disappointment. Whereas the vaccine trials have gone more quickly, I think, than some of us anticipated, these antibody trials have gone more slowly.